Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
Now clear your minds. It knows what scares you. It has from the very beginning. Don't give it any help. It knows too much already.
Ninth Green Oddity, submitted by Richard. What I'm about to share with you is probably one of the most unsettling and unforgettable stories you'll ever hear. My name is Richard, and I've been an ardent, lifelong golfer for well over 50 years. I love the game so much that I'll play in any type of weather, be it bitterly cold, soaking wet, blistering hot, you name it. I simply adore the challenge and exacting precision the sport presents. I'm from the Midwest, Wisconsin, which as many know limits one's golf season to a fleeting 6 or 7 months out of the year. I was supposed to play a late round afternoon with my longtime buddy Don, but he called to cancel, saying his wife, citing the ominous weather forecast, had insisted he stay home to avoid the coming thunder and rain. I understood, but I stubbornly said, hell with it. I was determined to squeeze in 9 holes before the approaching storm broke, and the evening darkness swallowed the course whole. I regularly play at the quaint, unassuming municipal golf course nearby, which features only 9 holes. It's a relatively short track. The longest hole is just 450 yards, and on a swift, uncrowded evening like this, I knew I could play through 9 holes in about an hour and a half. If the rain held off, I was certain I could finish before the gloom fully set in. Upon entering the dimly lit clubhouse and purchasing my round, I was met by Maureen, the clubhouse attendant. With a solemn expression, she reminded me that a heavy, violent rainstorm was headed our way within the next hour. And I told her, that's okay, I'm going to give it a shot. As I teed up my ball on the first hole, the course stretched out before me, utterly deserted. I guess everyone else had concluded the rain wasn't worth the trouble and decided to play another day. By the time I reached the 9th and final hole, I could feel a dramatic shift. The wind had become chilling and aggressive. A deep, oppressive darkness was beginning to settle in, and the sky was intermittently lighting up with eerie, silent flashes of distant lightning. I'd been having such a magnificent round up until then, I figured, what the hell, I'm going to finish this. As I teed up the ball for the final stroke, I looked down the long, darkening fairway and my eyes narrowed. I could distinctly see what appeared to be a man standing on the green, motionless, holding on to the flag pin. Up until that point, I was certain I was the only foolhardy soul on the course, so I yelled out 4 to warn the figure I was about to hit. The hole was a manageable 210 yards, and I knew I could reach the green with my trusty 5-iron. As the ball left my club, I watched it fly. It was one of the crispest, most perfect shots I had hit all day, arcing directly toward the pin. After putting my iron back in my bag, I started the walk toward the green. The man was still standing there, stock still, the flag pin clutched in his hand. As I closed in about 30 yards away, a tremendous explosion of lightning and thunder erupted from the sky. Focusing on the green and the man holding the metal pin, I began to scream at him to drop it. I kept thinking to myself, doesn't this idiot know that lightning could strike that pole? Just then, a monstrous bolt of lightning descended, striking the pin and the man simultaneously. The sound was like a shattering explosion, and the entire sky lit up in a blinding, ghastly white, more intense than any 4th of July firework display. Upon witnessing the horrifying spectacle, I dropped my golf bag and started running as best I could up the hill toward the green, and although I truly believed I never took my eyes off the man, by the time I scrambled up the incline, barely 10 yards from the green, he was gone, nowhere in sight. By this time, the darkness was complete and the rain was falling in a cold, furious deluge. The man was not on the green. The flag pin was back in the hole, perfectly upright, but the guy had vanished. And how the hell could that be? I pulled out my phone to dial 911, but a paralyzing thought stopped me. What was I supposed to tell him? After looking around for a frantic 5 minutes, thoroughly soaked and trembling, I could barely make out the distant light of the clubhouse, and I began the long, miserable walk back. As I entered the clubhouse looking for Maureen, my eyes fell on a small mounted photo board. As I moved closer, my blood turned to ice. The man I had seen on the course was staring back at me from one of the faded photographs. Once Maureen returned to the counter, I recounted my entire unbelievable story and pointed a shaking finger at the man in the picture. With a blank, unsettling, calm face, she looked up from the counter, took my hand, and led me to a back room. And she pointed to a framed yellowing newspaper clipping. It was a story about one of the local golfers who had been fatally struck by lightning 5 years ago while playing with his wife on the 9th hole. As I read the headline and looked from the printed photo to the one on the board, a sickening sense of shock and absolute dread washed over me. Maureen gave me a glass of water, told me to sit down, and then delivered the final blow. There had been 5 similar, inexplicable sightings of the man on the 9th hole being struck by lightning over the last 3 years. I now wish I had listened to Don's wife when she warned about the coming rain and thunder. I haven't gone back to the course since that day, and now I'll only play when the sun is bright and bold, and I'm always with others. Note for golf enthusiasts. For any of you golf aficionados who listen to my story, you're probably wondering what happened to that perfect ball I said heading toward the pin. When I finally walked up to the hole and peered into the cup, I found a single, singed black golf ball resting eerily below the pin. Time Dilation on Superior Hiking Trail by Jesse 1472. This happened about a year ago while hiking with my brother. We went on a day hike on the Superior Hiking Trail in Minnesota, starting at a trailhead just north of Tofte. The trip up to that point had been weird, with taking a late night trip to a grocery store in Duluth to get snacks, and the motel we were staying at potentially had hookers at it. It was Duluth, so we didn't think too much of it. Anyway, we started our hike early, around 7:30 or 8 a.m., and planned to hike for 4-ish hours before turning around and getting out of the woods around twilight. For people who haven't hiked the Superior Hiking Trail, it's fairly rugged, and not something you want to be doing in the dark. Plenty of elevation changes, and a mixture of prepared and unprepared trails await. The hike was decent. We were talking about life as I had gone through a rough patch not long before the hike. We were both fairly fit, so the steep grades at parts were challenging but doable, and this is important. We hiked about 4 or 5 hours and ended up near the Lutzen Lodge before turning around. While hiking, we had passed several groups, one of which was a group of college students clearly out for a leisurely stroll. At that point, we turned around and the time dilation started. We started hiking back at a noticeably slower pace, maybe a half or a little faster than half of what we'd been doing before. As we walked, we didn't see any other group, but started noticing a bunch of mushrooms that, as far as our research found, weren't native to the area. We got back to a point where we had stopped at earlier to figure out if we needed to speed up. My brother checked his phone while I was kind of zoning out before he asked me, "What time do you think it is?" Recounting our pace and location, I assumed it was around 4 p.m. and we needed to pick up the pace to be out in an hour. Lo and behold, we somehow had crossed the same distance that took us 2 hours before in only 1 hour. It was 1 p.m.-ish. As we were trying to figure out how we had hiked that distance faster, at a slower pace, we began to realize that all of the groups we had passed before hadn't been around since. At the very least, we should have seen the college group unless they had gone way off trail. Finally, we got back to the trailhead that we started on, a whole 2 hours earlier than planned. Somehow, we had cut 2 hours from our predicted return while walking slower. The whole time, though, it felt like being in the Twilight Zone, but I had assumed up to that point that it was just the atmosphere of a trail in the fall. The Laughing Runner by Dan L. This is a story my mother told me that happened to her when she was in her early 20s. She was married to her first husband, and they had rented a small apartment just outside our city center. It was in a block of around 10 other apartments. At the time, my mother was much more open-minded about ghosts and all things paranormal. One evening, she and her first husband, Mick, were entertaining guests, and they decided to play around with the Ouija board. There was some movement of the planchette, and my mom recalled how it had told them a spirit of a construction worker was there, who had been murdered and buried in the foundations of a motorway bridge. Other than that, it wasn't that exciting, and they ended the evening, and the guests went home, and they disposed of the Ouija board stuff. The next morning, my mom got up and went into the living room to find the letters from the Ouija board scattered all over the floor. As I mentioned, everything they had made for the Ouija board had been disposed of, and all the pieces had been pushed down into the waste bin. 2 letters, though, had been singled out and sat away from the rest. They were the 2 initials of the construction worker that had contacted them the previous evening. My mom thought it was Mick just trying to scare her, but he denied doing it. About a week later, my mom's wedding ring went missing for around a week, and then suddenly reappeared on a mantelpiece above the fire, where my mom had left it when taking it off to do housework. The ring suddenly was not in good condition. It had been squashed flat, but with no apparent damage to the stone, its setting, or the band itself. She remembered setting it down, and then it disappearing, and then reappearing that week later. Other strange occurrences plagued both of them until they moved. Lights would turn themselves on and off in the bathroom, and they would often hear a sound of a man urinating in the toilet, followed by the toilet being flushed. My mom would investigate, but never find anyone. And there was a strange smell of cigarette smoke in the lounge, even though no one ever smoked in there. This was a time in the early 70s when the living room was kept for entertaining guests, and so always kept for best. Not long after that, my mom and Mick separated, and they moved out of the apartment. The next part of the story involves my ex-brother-in-law. He moved out of my mother-in-law's house and into a rented house with his friend. It was a 2-bedroom, semi-detached house, which for a while had been used as a renting accommodation, seeing a fair few families through its doors. They lived there for a few weeks, my brother-in-law and his friend, enjoying the freedom that it gave them both as young single men. It was about the time my brother-in-law's friend got himself a lady friend, and she started stopping over, when the troubles began. My brother-in-law, ex, who we will call Matt, would be in his room, and he would hear a tap blasting out water, either in the kitchen or the bathroom. Thinking his housemate Ben had left it on, he would turn it off. But it continued happening for a while before Matt felt the need to tackle the issue with Ben. When he told Ben about it, Ben told him that he was having similar experiences, thinking that Matt was responsible. Neither of them had been turning on the tap. Things also started going missing, only to reappear days later in very obvious places. The most disturbing phenomenon was what started next. Matt would be laying in bed at night and would hear, coming from the upstairs landing, the sound of a child's laughter, very clear and unmistakably coming from just outside his bedroom door. At first he ignored it, but when it went on for over a week he mentioned it to Ben, but he hadn't heard anything. The final straw came one night when once again Matt was lying in bed trying to sleep, when he heard a thunderous noise from the landing. He said it sounded like a child running up and down the stairs, then followed by the same laughter he had heard previously. Well, that scared him, and he was just about to get out of bed to turn the light on, when his bedroom door flew open. Matt sat in bed, dumbstruck with fear, as he heard the laughter run into the room. Something, though he couldn't see it, then ran right over his bed. He saw the bed sheets depress as invisible feet ran across, and he said he could also feel the extra weight push his mattress down. Whatever it was that ran across his bed, it was still laughing and then disappeared into the opposite corner of his room. Then everything got quiet. Needless to say, they didn't stay on that property for much longer. Although these stories are pretty scary to me, I've never been privy to such extraordinary experiences, much to my disappointment. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this episode on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give it a thumbs up? Leave me a comment, I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. And if you're not a subscriber, hey, become a subscriber today and maybe even tell a friend about the channel. I'd appreciate it. Pick yourself up some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. There's a link to my TeePublic storefront in the description. And of course, follow me on social media. We're almost here, gang. Almost time for the 2025 Halloween extravaganza. Looking forward to this one. I hope you'll enjoy it. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.